This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
China. Just saying the name of this country is enough to spark so many different associations in most Westerners' minds. But the truth is, China has a vast population of 1.4 billion people, almost 20% of the world's population, that live across 9.5 million square kilometers. And to put all of these people into under one word, China, it's a bit difficult. There are so many different types of people, so many different religions in China. Little did we know, there is a population of Jews in China. And today we are joined by Noam Urbach, a China expert active in academia, in business, and in media. Noam specializes in the study of the history of foreign religions in China. In particular, the history of Chinese Jews, as well as Chinese religious policy. We are super excited to have him on the show today to talk China and religions in China specifically. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, there are Jews in China?
Sort of, yeah.
How many? Do you know? Is there like a huge Jewish population?
No, so it's no straightforward answer. Let's separate two categories, okay? There are foreign expat Jews. Okay. That's clear, like in any international, in global country, in the international cities of China, you have growing, at least until COVID-19, you had growing concentrations of foreign Jews, Israeli, American, etc. Usually adjourned, concentrated around Chabad houses and or reform unaffiliated small communities.
Yeah, Chabad is it's like there's three things in life that are certain: death, taxes, and Chabad, right?
Yeah,
no matter where you are.
Yeah. So they came to China as well. The first place was Hong Kong.
Okay.
And that's back, I think, in the 80s already. And but only in 2000, around 2000, Shanghai was the first in mainland China, and then Beijing.
But how long were Jews? Yeah.
But
so
other than the expat.
Okay, so that's the expat. And let's go back to the earlier category.
Like, are there actually Chinese Jews?
Yeah, so the earlier categories will be the earlier expats, meaning immigrants who came in the 19th century and early 20th century, and of course the famous case of the Shanghai Holocaust fugitives in World War II. Almost 30,000 Jews, mainly from Germany and Austria, and some from Poland.
Or 30,000? 30,000.
Yeah, around 30,000 Jews.
Wow.
Who found a safe haven in Shanghai. That's a very well, repeated and again and again told and retold story in all kinds of, also I would say, romanticized fashions. In Shanghai, every so often you have some new book, story, film, TV series, cartoon series, musical, theatrical play, all kinds of depictions and
it's kind of
that story.
I mean, it's familiar. I'm not sure if I know the details.
There's a museum in Shanghai as well.
Is it like a one-man thing? Is it like the Chinese Schindler, or was it like an operation by the Chinese
Yeah, so government? There is one individual called, his name is Kaifeng Jews, who has become really identified with this story of Shanghai, even though technically his role was only, it was only one section of it, because any Jew theoretically who could get out of Europe could arrive in Shanghai. The whole what made Shanghai a safe haven, a place where Jews could escape to, was the fact that it was international and open, and you didn't need a visa to get in.
Ah, really?
Yeah. So, but then some of them had to have visas to leave Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So Kaifeng Jews is one of those who gave them visa. Another one was the Japanese, Sugihara.
Yeah.
So both,
Sugihara,
so both these individuals are they're both recognized as Chasidei Umot Olam, as
How do you pronounce his name?
righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. So the Sugihara is the Japanese.
Yeah.
They're both associated with the escape of Jews to the east, to either Japan, Kobe, or Shanghai. And some went through Kobe to Shanghai.
And the Chinese guy's name is again?
Is Kaifeng Jews.
Kaifeng Jews.
Yes.
So there's so much. I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like the Chinese names are so much more difficult than the Japanese. Like Japanese is
maybe
a lot easier to pronounce.
Yeah, I agree.
Kaifeng Jews.
Yeah, Kaifeng Jews.
Kaifeng Jews. Okay.
Yes.
And before the 19th century.
Okay, so that's 19th and 20th century. Before that, there's a big gap going way back to around the 10th century or the 11th century, when Jews, probably Persian-speaking Jews from Central Asia, be it Persia or today's Bukhara, Uzbekistan, immigrated, traveled along the Silk Road, to the edge, to the eastern, most Chinese end of the Silk Road, which was practically Kaifeng. It was the capital of China during Song Dynasty at that time. Mm-hmm. And, traveling merchant Jews settled there. And this is documented.
And did they maintain their Judaism?
Okay, so the whole thing, by the way, I must point out, there are other theories that they came from India, came through other routes, but it's definitely the presence of Jews at that time, during the 12th, 13th, 14th century, was to do with the fact that Kaifeng was the capital of China and on the end of the Silk Road.
Were they running away from something? Were they escaping
probably not.
the Persian
probably
Empire?
No. According to estimates, I imagine there's nothing accurate in this history.
Okay.
But
it's somehow assumed, they end up in China.
Yeah, it's assumed that the same as they ended up in Bukhara and Samarkand and Afghanistan of today, and there are signs, there are all kinds of evidence that they were in Xinjiang. There were, stations where merchants, there were documents that were found in Tajik Hebrew, Tajik in Hebrew letters. So this whole thing was discovered, and that's part of my, small contribution to the research. That's what my PhD is centered on, is the Christian element within the story of Kaifeng Jews. So from the beginning, from the first moment they were discovered to the world, that there is what we can now talk about as Chinese Jews, was discovered by Christians, and actually by the first Catholic missionary who, settled in China, moved to China, Matteo Ricci, in the end of the 16th century, and actually in 1600, that's the year when he first encountered the person from Kaifeng, when he was already in Beijing as the first, Catholic missionary. He encountered a person who he understood was a Chinese Jew.
So at that time, they were still practicing their Judaism, but did they maintain it? Are there still remnants of the? Even
at that time, according to what we have, which are actually quite elaborate descriptions and documentation by different emissaries Jesuit, Christian Catholic emissaries who especially traveled to Kaifeng during the early 17th century, actually, until the last time was 1724. So for over 100 years, you had visits of Jesuits, priests, which were very intellectual European priests, Catholic priests, who traveled to Kaifeng quite a few times to document what they could about the community. And the community then was clearly a Chinese Jewish community, because their main language was Jewish, was Chinese. They had a combination of using, Chinese and Hebrew together. Textual Hebrew, probably no speaking Hebrew, no evidence of them speaking Hebrew at that time, but definitely using it as a ritual language.
How old is the Chinese language? Is it older than Hebrew?
Oh, so that's, in diplomatic events, it's often, use this idea, this notion of Hebrew and Chinese are the oldest, living traditions, living lingual, systems, language systems. So it's pretty old. The Chinese is you have the beginning is 5,000 years ago, theoretically, but it really evolved in the first 1,500 BC. That's the first, when we really see it's called oracle bones, where you see the first stages of Chinese script.
Mm-hmm. When they
Oracle
developed-
bones?
Yeah, the first evidence of Chinese writing system were used as part of like source thing. What's the word when you when you like all kinds of seance practitioners,
Okay.
would check things with
Sorcery.
the spirits. Sorcery, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the word. Okay, different types of sorcery. One of the main techniques, presumably, then were when a kind of a person, a
sorcerer.
a sorcerer, or some priest or whatever,
Uh-huh.
would have a question to deal with that he has to find an answer, by taking advice from the spirits above.
Mm.
So he would crack a bone, usually a hip bone of a cow or another animal,
Write something on.
and then he would analyze the cracks that would appear after cracking, hitting the bone and checking the crack there, and that crack will tell him the secrets, of what the spirits are telling him, the answer.
But were there
to-
writings on the bone?
So
Like-
so the results of that, his analysis was documented, or with these generations upon generations of these sorcerers, their analysis was documented. They documented it by writing these characters, which are the earliest forms of Chinese language. And surprisingly, they're very close. I mean, they have, you can
read
see,
it.
Not really read it, unless you're a scholar of
Yeah.
that.
But it's
that field.
familiar to modern
you
Chinese
see,
words.
Yes, you can see the
I have it
continuum.
in Google Translate. You can do oracle bones to English.
Yeah.
I'm sure Google has that.
But
yeah.
you mastered Chinese, Mandarin.
I wouldn't say master is a hard word. It's when you're talking about Chinese language, and I can tell you that I was much better. That any day spent in Israel here without using it daily on a daily basis, then my Chinese language skills are deteriorating, both reading, writing, and
So you
speaking.
spent time there in China? How long? Where?
I was, all in all, I was around 3 years in China. So the first time was after the army, the traditional tiul,
Yeah.
the trip after
But
the army.
the traditional, but the unconventional in your case, because most people
Yeah.
go to Southeast Asia,
So
or
that-
to lie on a beach. You went to China.
Yeah, I went also to China. That was the main part of my trip, was 3 months in China, and actually not in the popular places, not in the east coast of China where Shanghai, Beijing is, but in the outskirts, in the periphery.
Oh wow.
Especially
China.
those, some would say, okay, that's a funny
It's not
choice
where
of
most
words.
Chinese
Yeah,
live,
because
right?
real China would be between the rivers, like the Aram Naharaim, between the rivers of Iraq. That's the beginning of civilization here. So in China, it's between the the Yellow River and the Jianghe, the Yangtze in English, Yangtze River and Yellow River. So
Okay.
that's usually towards the eastern part of China, central eastern China. But I traveled more to the west, to the contentious parts.
Like Tibet.
Where the
and-
Chinese government would excuse my French, but the contentious part of China, Tibet, Xinjiang, places that became much more interesting, today. Because at that time, Xinjiang was not talked about, not really discussed in international circles. Today, much more.
Mhm.
So I was there. I was there a month, and actually, I picked up before learning Chinese. I picked up a bit of Uyghur language.
Uyghur, which is the Muslim population.
Yeah, the Muslim population of the most western province in China called Xinjiang.
Xinjiang.
Yes.
Okay, so wait a second. Let's go back 1 second to the Jews, and then I want to ask you kind
Okay.
of more generally about religion in China and like what the major ones are, and we can dive into it a bit. But so beyond these Kaifeng Jews, which were exiles from Persia, there are no earlier like Jewish population or evidence of an earlier Jewish population. It's not like, I don't know, like the Ethiopian or the Indian Jew, where there's some kind of ancient, maybe a lost tribe or something like that.
Okay, so this kind of speculation
Yeah.
is you hit it on, I think, on the spot. These kind of speculation rise up in all parts of the world.
Okay.
And that's also a very interesting phenomenon, I think, that's worthy of more research. I consider it an obsession with Jews. And I have actually a few lessons that I can draw, and maybe in the future I will write about it something and make it more into a coherent theory or something. But what I discovered when seeing so much of Christian involvement in this very small case of Chinese Jews, it's never more than a few thousand people in the 150 years we're talking about, since the last 150 years, we're talking about no more than a few hundred people, maybe. If even they were living as a community before Christianity came, because I see how much Christianity was an influence, was like an engine in raising awareness and attention. And even when you see, because as I told you, Chinese Jews in Kaifeng were discovered in 1600 by Matteo Ricci, Jesuit Christian Catholic monastery missionary, and then contact was lost for a few hundred years, and then the next time was in the middle of the 19th century when an Anglican church mission went to rediscover the Kaifeng Jews and found them and bought all their artifacts and Sifrei Torah and etc.
Oh, wow.
So the newest awareness or existence of Kaifeng Jews is also ignited by Christians, this time Anglicans. And this is well documented in books, etc. And actually, what I'm showing in my current research, is that it's not just by chance or on על הדרך, איך אומרים באנגלית על הדרך, like
by the by.
Yeah, it's not coincidental. Yeah, it's not like an offhanded, let's go visit Kaifeng and see if the Jews are still there, since they were last reported 200 years earlier. But it was actually the first time the Anglican bishop of China, the first Anglican bishop who was appointed to China, centered in, based in Hong Kong. And he has jurisdiction of the entire East Asia. He had jurisdiction of Southeast Asia as well, and Japan as well. He was like the Anglican bishop of East Asia. And his first mission out of his home base in Hong Kong was to Kaifeng. Not him personally, but he sent two emissaries to find the Jews in Kaifeng. So for us, what is an anecdote, a very unimportant, so there are a few Jews in China, they were not really Jewish, there was some kind of Chinese, maybe they were originally Jewish, but then they intermarried, so they're not really any Jews anymore, etc. But for Anglicans, this was a big deal.
So why?
That's a good question. That's in vaguely, I would say, like in a wide approach, and this is beyond the issue of China. This is just my theory that at least since Christianity and Islam, we're talking about a world which is obsessed with Judaism, because you have two world religions, huge world religions, Christianity and Islam, both of them intrinsically obsessed with Jews, with Judaism as a religion, with Jews as a people. It's all over their religion, in their scriptures, etc. So you have a world imagining Jews even before they see Jews, and having opinions about Jews even before they meet Jews, and seeing the huge importance, for good or for bad, of Jews as something. So
kind of like
today.
There is today, yeah.
Yeah.
Some things don't change.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was connected with Zionism as well. You had the first consul, British consul in Israel, who wrote two books, actually. Finn.
Phil.
Yeah, Finn.
Finn or Phil?
James Finn, I think his name.
Okay, James Finn.
I'm confused for a second, but he actually published two books in the later part of the 19th century. One when he was still in England, and then the other after he came back from 20-something years of serving in Jerusalem as the consul, the British consul in Palestine, right? And he published two books about Kaifeng Jews.
Wow.
With a clear, which were not merely academic, they were a clear, like a manifesto, a call to go and rediscover Kaifeng Jews and bring them to Israel. And they would lead Zionism.
Really? And he wasn't Jewish, this guy?
No, he was Christian.
That's weird.
You go back to how did
It's
the
like
Balfour...
a lost ark, kind of a...
Yeah.
They must have imagined this ancient Chinese Jewish community has secrets to I don't know.
It didn't go so far. I don't recall him writing that. More kind of a faith in, you have Anglican Christians and other Christians in America and North America as well, who were obsessed with Zionism before Zionism started.
Yes, but why focusing on this particular Chinese community?
Okay, so it's interesting because it's like Finn's case is a bit different. Other Christian groups saw this as related directly to different prophecies of that the gospel will come back, or Jews in the later days, will come back from the edge of the world and they will complete the circle and then come back to Jerusalem, and that will bring the second coming of Christ. But that's more evangelical of sorts, believe that. And I'm not an expert on that, but for James Finn, it was a personal,
Connection.
It was a personal mishigas, let's put it this way, okay? Obsession with this. That you would find other Christians who were obsessed with other Jewish communities that need to be discovered, okay, like in India, etc., in Ethiopia. So James Finn shtick, was let's go find the Kaifeng Jews.
That's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Like, how bored were these guys? Find a life.
Let's
Get
go
alive.
find why? That's their life. Kaifeng Jews. Find these Kaifeng Jews. So wait, tell us a bit about your time in China beyond the 3 months after the military. So you spent 3 years there beyond that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And
I
where
worked.
and why
I finished.
and how
I studied physics and computer science,
Mm-hmm.
and I finished a BSc, a BA, and I worked in high tech in Israel. And I wanted to jump out the window because I didn't find my calling in it.
Yeah.
And so in 1999, I quit my job and I went to China. And this time I said, like, my idea was that I had enough traveling. I would rather now just sit in one place and learn to understand better what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a chance to learn a bit Chinese in university when I saw a post saying, there's an elective course in Chinese, modern Chinese. And I found myself in that little course investing, spending more time on homework for that course than any other physics course that I had.
It's harder than physics.
Yeah, for me at least, yeah, it was harder. I put I put a lot of time, and then I felt results. I felt that the language sat on me, maybe based on that 3 months.
What's like
that
the
I
most
traveled.
the hardest concept for Western language to understand?
I think that definitely the two aspects. One is the writing system. For some people, that's very hard. For everyone, for some people, it's more of a turn down. So they give up. And the other is the pronunciation. The phonetic element, especially not really the syllables and the consonants, but which are also weird. But the tonality. But for some people who are tone deaf, it's very hard. I can tell you an interesting statistics. After teaching more than 10 years Chinese, that a standard first-year Chinese, if you compare first-year Chinese and first-year physics in university, I believe the dropout rate in Chinese is maybe as high as in physics. Because I studied in physics. When I was in physics, by the second year, at least half were gone. And in Chinese, it's not that far.
I'd imagine it would be higher in Chinese because I'd imagine there's like 2 people and they both quit. So it's like 100%.
No, you'd be surprised.
So Chinese became popular because of the importance of China and the relevance of China. At least until COVID, I think it was always on the rise.
Yeah.
Apparently, I've been hearing that statistically, for some reason, less learn. I think, let's be honest, smart people don't waste time on studying Chinese in a foreign university like in Israel. Mm-hmm. If you want to know Chinese, you go to China, and that's how I learned.
So you ended up going to
China and enlisting into a university and
doing like an exchange program.
No, I just paid a few.
And you could do that in '99. You could just sign up to a university and attend.
Yeah, it worked
as a citizen of any country in the world, or specifically because it was Israel.
I'm not sure. Maybe if I don't know.
Basically, you signed up, you
pay something, and
you paid,
you're
and you were
in,
able to go.
Where
Yes.
in China?
in Harbin, actually, which is also an interesting place where, in terms of Jews,
Where is
because
it?
that's where Olmert's father was born, or grandfather. or something
right.
like that.
Because
Yeah.
Jews came there from the
Russian
Holocaust.
Jews, not from
Not
Holocaust,
from the Holocaust.
earlier, late 19th century,
Uh-huh.
Russian Jews who had an opportunity to escape anti-Semitism in Tsarist Russia,
Uh-huh.
and they technically got jobs there.
And where is it exactly?
On the edge of the Siberian, the Siberian Railroad.
Okay.
So it was basically a Chinese,
So it's
a
like
Russian
the northern,
city.
northeast, like the
Yes, it's the-
Manchuria.
Exactly.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
northern part of Manchuria.
Look at you.
So it's the northeastern part of China.
I don't know where that came from.
Mossad,
Okay, so-
Mossad lessons.
Yeah.
So that's where you went, and you spent
Yes.
2
I was a
years?
semester there, and then the next semester I
Okay.
left Harbin and I moved to Kaifeng.
And how was it there in college? Like, I mean, first of all, you were probably, I mean, everybody else was Chinese. You were the foreigner?
No, there was actually places like it's not Beijing and Shanghai, so there were definitely much less foreigners and foreign students as well. So in Harbin, I took the cheapest university I could find, because I figured, I'm not here for anything fancy, just to know the language. So any place was good.
And you were,
And-
what were you studying?
So it was a funny university called Northeastern Forestry University, not one of the posh, famous places that foreigners were, courting.
Yeah.
And there was just one residential building there, who's usually housed in the neighborhood that's housed by professors, by teachers and
Uh-huh.
workers of the university, within the compounds of the university. So they had this one building which was for foreigners to live. So some of them were teachers, English teachers. There were a few Koreans, a few Japanese, 3 Finnish students who always were every year there for an exchange program with the forestry university in Finland. They also have forests in Finland.
It was a forestry university?
forestry.
So you were studying forestry?
No. It means that this university had a specialty in forestry studies.
What were
They-
you studying there?
I was studying just Chinese.
Just Chinese?
Yeah,
So
they
you were-
had a small program for foreigners to study Chinese.
So most of your classmates were actually foreigners?
But Korean and Japanese,
Yeah.
predominantly Koreans.
Okay.
They
I
had
see.
one small program there that one Korean group, was connected with them, and they opened this.
And did you manage
program.
to mingle with actual local Chinese people?
Yeah, I think so. From the beginning, that's.
Did you date Chinese girls?
Oh, you're asking us a sensitive question for a Dati person,
Okay.
Okay,
I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know if I don't know if you.
So the answer isn't that complicated. No.
I wish it was. Okay.
Oh, really? Okay.
No.
Sorry,
Seems-
it's just that we don't know your history. Here in Israel, sometimes people with kippah, maybe when they were young, they didn't have kippah. Maybe
Okay.
you never know, right?
I guess we
didn't
found
talk
out
about
what
that.
the limits of the conversation.
Okay, yeah,
We've spoken. There's no no censorship from China. But
No, I'm
Okay.
asking. I'll get you out. I'll get you
There's
out of the
censorship
mess.
from my wife, maybe. Yeah.
I'll get you out of this mess. I'm asking because it's an anecdote, but I met this girl who lived in China for several years until she fled during just when COVID started. And she told me horrific stories about dating from a girl's point of view. But she basically told me that, generalizing, of course, all Chinese men, young Chinese men, are extremely childish and vulgar and undateable. So I was wondering.
I mean, it's like 1.4 billion people.
I don't want to generalize.
She dated
Yeah, listen, I'm
700
sure
million Chinese men.
I'm sure you'll get other perspectives from
Of
other
course,
people.
yeah, I know. But yeah, that's like the anecdote I heard. So yeah, I was just curious.
So what was social life like in Harbin?
In Harbin,
Harbin. Like
taking me back, it's hard for me to recall. It was interesting, basically.
Wow. But
A lot of my experience was the mingling with the Korean neighbors that I had, and flatmates and classmates, which were basically predominantly Korean. Actually, a funny anecdote there was that when I first arrived there, I was after one semester in Israel, and I probably caught on quite well in terms of the pronunciation, but I was still just a beginner. So when I went into the office there in the university, he heard me speaking, and he said, "Whoa, straight to the advanced class." And I went into the class, I didn't understand anything. So he took me down to medium level, and still didn't understand. So he took me to the basic level, and that was for me. And still, repeatedly it happened in class that I would get confused. Suddenly they talk fast, not in beginner level, and I can't understand anything. It suddenly sounds a bit different. And only after that, it took me some time to figure out that the teacher was a Korean Chinese. And anytime the Koreans had a problem understanding something, they switched to Korean.
That's not fair.
Yeah, so I became the bad guys because
maybe you don't know, but in till today, you actually speak Korean.
Yeah, that's Chinese. Yeah.
Maybe it all got mixed up.
Yeah, so I complained, and then I was the bad guy because the university forced them to quit
to
using
stop.
Korean, in class.
Okay, I see.
So they were scared of me,
So you spent about a semester there, and then
Yes.
what was?
And
the
then I
rest
moved
of
to
that
Kaifeng.
tour?
I traveled in the winter vacation, and I wanted to stop over in Kaifeng because I heard about this Jewish thing, and I found it interesting. And I stopped over, and I saw there's nothing really. I found nothing there, So I thought it was, there was something in history, nothing now, nothing living now. But I liked the place, so I moved there, and I enlisted in a university there, because you have to be registered in some university to get a long-term visa.
Okay. You have to have a student visa.
Yeah, and actually, when I was living there in Kaifeng, then the Jewish story kept coming back at me, and I understood. And that's my original research project, which was my MA thesis, and it's published, and you're welcome to read it if you're very bored. But it's what I discovered there is that this minor issue, unexisting issue of Kaifeng Jews, which don't really exist, but it's just waiting. It's somewhere there under the earth, hiding under the earth, was actually the most. The most pressing or the most promising, the most contentious issue of the city, of the government of the city.
Really?
It was their hope of becoming international.
Wow.
Because when
So how did this come out? Like, how did you discover this?
Okay, so in the late 80s, during the 1980s, when foreigners started arriving in China and visiting China, especially Americans and Europeans, and they read these books that were published earlier by academics in America, books about Kaifeng Jews, especially by Michael Pollack, which a book that became really popular in the early 80s, actually 70s already. So people read these books and they knew about Kaifeng Jews and they came to find them. So all kinds of businessmen, scholars, and etc., they stopped over in Kaifeng, just like I was curious. So this was in the 80s already. People would stop again and again. Jews would stop, and Christians would stop in Kaifeng looking for Jews. And the potential, and then in the beginning, there were no relations with Israel. So it was clear to everyone that nothing can be developed here. No Jewish community can be developed in Kaifeng, and no touristic experience regarding Jews can be explicit, openly existing in Kaifeng, because Jews are associated with Israel, and there were no relations with Israel. But when relations started becoming closer, and in 1989, the Madrid conference, and then in 1992 there was established diplomatic relations between Israel and China. So right after that, within months, in Kaifeng was established a society to study Kaifeng, the history of Chinese Jews, an official society, and I documented this. I published this in my my research. I found the government decision establishing this society, and they had a stamp, an official stamp, and what's that to say, council, whatever. And within another few months, the local government, the municipal government, made a clear decision to rebuild the Kaifeng synagogue, which was a temple, like a Chinese temple, which was a kind of a Chinese-style Confucian temple, which was Jewish, which was also a synagogue, and they had Sifrei Torah and reading and everything, right? And a clear decision to rebuild that synagogue, and they were looking for funds, etc. But that, within just a few years, it collapsed. This whole idea of reestablishing a Kaifeng synagogue. And that's what I tried to analyze, that it was too complicated to justify the threats or the possibilities of things getting complicated, of having a new religion which is not not officially recognized in China. Because in China you have, and that was your previous question, there are 5 recognized religions in China.
Okay.
So it's Buddhism, Taoism being the original Chinese religion, Buddhism, which came from India, and then Islam, and then Catholicism and Protestant Christianity. So that's 5 religions which are officially recognized. So any establishment which is a religious center has to be registered, to be legal, it has to be one of these. And
Buddhism, Taoism, Islam,
Christianity and Catholicism. It's 2 separate religions. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and all of these religions have a centralized organization, like a centralized church that oversees the operations. And they have to be independent. There are all kinds of rules. They have to be independent from foreign forces. They can't take money from outside of China. They can't take missionaries from outside of China. They have to be self-sufficient. And they have to be patriotic, for the Communist Party, and their speech and their sermons are scrutinized, to always make sure that they're following party line, etc., etc. And then there are all kinds of religious groups who separate and go underground. So they're not really legal, and often they can be, depending on the political climate, they can be persecuted to some extent.
Because Islam, it is surprising to hear that Islam is a recognized religion, especially because of the dealing of the Uyghur Muslims, and also because there's this not nationalistic, but there's this like missionary, occupational conquering kind of like element to Islam, right? Like in Judaism, there's the Zionist element. Yeah, but in Christianity, there's also a missionary element. But in Islam, it's more like...
I think you're thinking of the word jihad, right?
Yeah, there's the jihadist, right?
Yeah, so in China, definitely it's different. There are different kinds of Islam in China, mainly the Uyghurs that you mentioned in the West, but they're a separate ethnic group and with a separate language. They speak a Turkic language, similar to Turkish. And then there are what we call Chinese Jews, Chinese Muslims, which are called in China mainly Hui and other minority groups. So Hui is the main, the generalized, ethnic categorization of Muslims in China, of Chinese-speaking Muslims. And basically, I would say it's contained. So there's no... China would insist that the Muslims in China, Chinese Muslims, are peaceful and their religion is peaceful. I can tell you that there's no missionary Islam in China, meaning you don't see Islamic, you don't see the Islamic community there, Chinese Muslims making campaigns to convert Chinese into Islam.
Because then they'll disappear in the street.
You make it sound more dramatic, but
yes,
it's illegitimate and
what about the old cults in? Because what comes to mind is one of the things I've been obsessed with for some time is the epoch times.
Yeah.
And if you guys don't know about them, it's fascinating. It's basically a air quotes news organization funded by this religious movement. They call themselves the Falun Gong.
To some extent, it's connected with Falun Gong, but it's not necessarily funded by, especially in Israel.
I'm not speaking about Israel. In Israel, if you say anything about them, you get sued for slander. So I'm not speaking about
by Epoch Times.
They're pretty. They're pretty. I won't say anything about them. But
so who's talking about censorship now?
I got into arguments with them on Twitter, and anyway, it's interesting. So I got into this rabbit hole, and also in America, they supported Trump, and there's this whole, and they are supposedly anti-government in China.
Yeah, okay.
In China,
of course.
I don't know.
So their whole stance. Let's be very general about it. There's all kinds of Falun Gong media organs. There's Tangdai. It's called Tangdai New Tang TV, and it's New Tang Dynasty TV, and that's a television organ. And there's Epoch Times, which is a newspaper in Israel. It's a magazine more than a newspaper, and it's really different. And but in general terms, you have Falun Gong. Falun Gong is a Qigong sect, cult, practice, group, meditative group, whatever you want to define them.
They have a leader.
What?
They have a leader.
They have a leader who is living in New York, in
Mhm.
upper state New York, and they.
He was exiled, no?
Yeah, he escaped. So in 1999, I was living actually in China when the persecution started. Like very harsh persecution against Falun Gong, and the Chinese the government, at that time Jiang Zemin, the president, almost in a personal way, took a clear stance against Falun Gong, seeing them as a political threat to the government, based maybe on Chinese history, where different kinds of cults could challenge the government, could evolve into a massive political military movement and rebel against the government, and even like challenge the dynasty and topple dynasties as well. The latest example would be the Tianpi, the Taiping rebellion in the middle of the 19th century, which began as a kind of a sect, a cult, even a Christian-influenced cult in one part of China, and it evolved into this huge, actually a kingdom which controlled parts of China and devastated, with millions of deaths, etc. So there's this history in China, and they connected the government, the CCP, the communists, connected this Falun Gong, Qigong practitioners, this movement, with the threat of cults in China, and they started a big campaign of really persecution, which continues until today, although they seem to have won this battle against them completely. So you don't see any presence of Falun Gong basically in mainland China. And this persecution, when you hear the complaints about the persecution, it's true. And this is things that maybe you heard me speak about in connection with COVID-19. And because I see a connection. Whenever people speak about people who are anti-vaxxers or simply want to challenge or to rethink vaccinations today in the West, and the government and the mainstream media, say that these are anti-scientific people, it rings for me a bell to 1999 when I was in China. Every day you would put on TV and radio or internet or whatever, and you see government, state organized campaigns to slander Falun Gong and to label them as anti-scientific. Because, for instance, they believed in not going to Western medicine and just doing meditation to heal from all kinds of
Which
ailments.
is anti-scientific.
In any other world, in any other country, you'd call that a choice. Not to use a certain medicine, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
to
is
trust.
a choice.
Yeah.
Everything is a choice.
Yeah,
I don't see contradiction between anti-scientific and a choice. You can choose to take the non-scientific path. But
I don't know, is suicide anti-scientific? Is self-mutilation, Brit Milah, anti-scientific? It's a
depends.
cultural choice.
If you say that, if you claim that circumcision is good for your health, some would argue it is. You can make an argument why it is not a scientific claim, because it's doubtable. But you can argue about it.
Okay.
You can argue about it. But
But you couldn't argue about it back then.
In China.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And today, the problem I think with the anti-vaxxers is that it's not up for debate. You're labeled as totally anti-scientific for one viewpoint.
Yeah. Anyway, so
on a
follow.
vaccine.
Let's keep to China, to the Chinese case, because we won't solve all the COVID arguments here. But Falun Gong is really a case of persecution, a clear, blunt case of very harsh persecution. So for instance, the arguments of the organ harvesting, it's when you hear apologetic pro-Chinese speech, parole that denies these claims of it's ridiculous, because China admitted them. So it admitted that once they take a life of a prisoner, of a felon, and they give him a death penalty, then in Chinese understanding, he doesn't own his body. They just killed him. They took his life. So if we're now talking about
in communist understanding, you don't own anything. You don't own your body even when you're alive. No, the government owns your body.
And we all agree that if you do a death penalty, then you take somebody's life. He doesn't own his own life, because you took legally, by means of the law, you took his life. So in China, the understanding until a few years ago, when they stopped it, according to their claims. Until then, it was not even denied. They have a right, to take organs from somebody who has a death penalty. So who exactly has a death penalty? Do they were Falun Gong practitioners simply killed or tortured or something? That's arguable, okay? Because there's evidence, and then there are claims by the government saying denying this. So you have to make your own research. But harvest, organ harvest was part of this. And the persecution, full-fledged persecution against Falun Gong was completely clear, and it's still today, technically. And this is going back to other things that I claim, for instance, against Confucius institutes. All over the world, this kind of, in Western countries, America, Europe, Australia, there's this talk that criticizing the decision of universities to house Confucius institutes within the university.
What are they?
What are Confucius Institute? It's a centralized, Chinese network of centers, cultural learning centers, that are purposely put within universities. Okay, and at least in Israel, you see it very clearly that they open 2 centers in 2 universities that have the biggest, the more important departments of East Asian Studies, which are the Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and Hebrew University. So they have Confucius Institutes in both of them, first Tel Aviv and later in Hebrew University. And it's devised and it's connected with the Department of East Asian Studies. And every term you have a Chinese director and an Israeli local director, which would be a professor of Chinese studies.
And it's funded by the Chinese government. And your problem is that it's inside the university campuses.
Yes, that it's connected with the academia that's
objective.
That's supposed to be objective, and they have one job. Okay, we have a very small number of professors, of researchers in Israel who are funded by university to study China. And I think our interest is to have them as open and as unbiased, independent, free to do their research. But they serve as diplomats. Once you let them, once you expect them. No, I wouldn't say. I'm not claiming they are. Yeah, not that far, not all of them, whatever. But when a university requests a sinologist, who gets a salary from the university to study China, to also serve for a year or 2 as a director of the Confucius Institute, to be connected with the Confucius Institute. The Confucian Institute has a role. It's propaganda for the Chinese government, right?
So they are propagandists.
What in that element, So they would say,
in effect, they are.
So when people argue against me in this, they say, we are professors, we have independence. The fact that I'm affiliated in this minor thing, I go to a conference that's co-organized by Confucius Institute, doesn't mean that I'm biased.
It's the conflict of interest issue, right? I mean, they might say they're independent and it's a minor thing, but they might question whether or not to ask a certain question academically. Okay. Right?
Definitely. Listen, I had arguments with them. I said, and I can ask you this. We talked about epoch times. Now let's leave aside your experience with them, which I don't, I don't refute in any way. But there are these activists in Israel who are Falun Gong practitioners, and some of them are affiliated with media organs that connected with Falun Gong, Epoch Times or New Tang Dynasty Television. I know one of them personally. Who are activists, right? They spend a lot of time criticizing the Communist Party of China and challenging them. They're not Chinese, they're Israeli, okay? And they published this newspaper. Epoch Times for years was a newspaper before it became this magazine in the local editorship of this group of people. It was other folks who really ran it as a newspaper for years that was dealing with criticizing China. So you had strong presence in Israeli, underground media, unofficial media, of explaining things about China which were negative at that time, right? But that's part of the game. So I'm asking, how come no university known to me that has a Department of East Asian Studies who periodically or repeatedly invites professors from China, diplomats from the embassy, the ambassador himself, to speak in all kinds of forums within the university, did they ever invite anyone from Falun Gong an Israeli supporter of Falun Gong or practitioner of Falun Gong to say his stance.
Mm-hmm.
They can argue with him, they can ask him hard questions, but academia is supposed to hear. When Israeli academia talks about the situation in the occupied territories or Judea or Samaria, they would have this conversation. They would say, how do we call this? Is this Judea and Samaria, or is this...
Hopefully, not always.
I hope, yeah.
But,
And they would definitely invite all kinds of speakers of, very left-wing organizations that oppose the Israeli stance within Israeli academia, who challenge the government of Israel. But you will not get in the university a speaker who challenges the government of a foreign country. China, you will not. And that's my argument. That
and Ivy League also has...
yeah.
In the United States.
Yes.
In the United States?
Yes. I'm not sure, I don't know much about in every university what the effect is, and definitely you have scholars who are openly critical of Chinese government.
But when you allow them in, you're...
It's like a virus.
No, I wouldn't use that word, of course.
I would.
So I don't...
did.
So my argument is clearly that the
it is a virus, though, in a sense that when you let into, because what is a virus? It's something that attacks the functioning or the purposeful functioning of an organism, right? So when sort of. Right? What I'm saying is, hold on. Well, I wanna kind of lay it out. What I'm saying is that an academic institution, the purpose of an academic institution is to like progress the endeavor of knowledge, right? The unfettered search of truth.
Yeah.
And when you let an organization the interest of that organization is other than the unfettered search of truth, is to progress an agenda, a political agenda, then it's a virus.
Okay, so I would not use the word virus, but I accept your description without the word virus, which I think is too charged and too negative. It's a political game. I don't think the Chinese government is bad in opening these Confucianist institutes. My criticism is to the universities, to the departments of East Asian studies that don't declare. We do not want to be affiliated in any way with Confucius Institute. I can give you an example. Example of. I raised in a Facebook discussion with a professor, a veteran professor of Chinese studies in one of these universities, and I argued, would your department invite and arrange a talk about the persecution or whatever you want to call it of Uyghurs currently in China today, in Xinjiang today, or the harsh measures the Chinese government is doing to deal with Uyghurs in Xinjiang? And he said, well, no university would do that because it's too sensitive or something. So his stance was his natural. Imagine that no university would dare do it, even a university that doesn't have a Confucius Institute, because all universities in Israel and all over the West want to have good relations with China and with the embassy.
He's so brainwashed from his short tenure as the director of the Confucius Center.
I'm not sure he was the director of the institute, but he's a professor of Chinese studies. He needs access to China. His career depends on having access to China.
We do see this. We've had other guests. I just want to say, and tell me if you see this as well.
Yeah.
We've had other guests on the show that have been related to China or have been somehow lived in China for a while or whatever. And I often see that anybody who kind of dives into the Chinese mess somehow comes out a little brainwashed. And a lot of the times it seems like, they're either scared to talk about China or they're unwilling to criticize. And sometimes it seems like the unwillingness to criticize or to cross that line, and they find themselves in this sort of cognitive what is it called?
Dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance, and they end up having to sort of believe the Chinese lies about
embrace
the Chinese culture
narrative,
and they end up saying things like that, which is like that no academic institution would talk, which is a ridiculous thing for a professor to say.
Yeah.
Do you see that with a lot of people in academia that are involved in research of China?
Definitely, and that's something I'm trying to
Change.
not to change because I have no power and I'm kind of the an
Here,
outsider.
you're on our podcast.
Okay, I'm here. Yes, I know what you're talking about. Okay,
I'm not crazy.
okay, and I'm limiting my observation, my criticism on this, and I'm limiting it to I understand business people with business interests who know that the rules of the game in China is that you don't speak freely about politics. When you're an Israeli businessman doing business in America or with America, you can be freely Trump or Biden or Democrat.
I don't know about that, but okay.
And you're never if you invest in America, you're not in real estate in America. You're not cautious of if you say something Trump, you will be, you won't be let into China or something. So you have the rules of it. And even if you're Chomskyan, and you're kind of you're critical of American influence in the world, you'll still be let into America, and your business, you won't be kicked out persona non grata. But in China, rules of the game are different, and people adhere to it. They accept it. It's the rules of the game here. Many more things are sensitive here, and we don't talk about it, and we don't say anything that's in Chinese you say 不好听, it means it's hard to hear. Things that are illegitimate, politically, right? So there's much more sensitivity here. Business people accept it or live with it.
I mean, some business people.
The ones who, as you describe, who have connections with China, and they start accepting these truths and the viewpoint. I'm critical about the academic element, okay? And I know that there is self-censorship. There is definitely a sense. If you are a sinologist who wants to continue working as a sinologist, you must have access to China. So if you're afraid that the same as they did,
it's a catch-22 situation.
Yeah, you can't cross invisible lines which you don't know where they are exactly, but you're wary of crossing them in a way that you will be not able to access China anymore and not get grants from China and not get cooperations with the universities there or not be invited to conferences there, etc. You want to be cool. You want to be in the know.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be too critical. And that exists even without Confucius Institute. Mm-hmm. My argument is that Confucius Institute is like we say in Hebrew to piss from the jumping thing.
Mm-hmm.
The word
jumping
in English.
Piss from the diving board, yeah.
Yeah. It's like, no, don't play by their rules. Insist that your academia is open, that your academia is the same as we speak in Israel in academia with Shovrim Shtika and with B'Tselem, okay, and all these left-wing anti-Israeli government, whatever, even anti-Zionist organizations.
But now when you criticized China on this show, will you be able to go there?
Okay, so I'll tell you what I decided with myself a long time ago, that I definitely didn't spend whichever much time learning something, in this case China and Chinese whatever, politics or history. I did not invest my time into something which I found interesting in order to shut up about or to limit my ability to speak about it. I think that would be, I'd rather be poor, than to be
dishonest.
Yeah, or to shut up about something that I invested so much time in. If I was not connected to China, okay, and I just there's a famous saying by somebody who has my surname, Uri Orbach. He was a member of Knesset and minister.
Yeah, and writer,
etc. Yeah. So there was this time when someone connected with Falun Gong tried to arrange, I think, a circle of a group, a cell of members of Knesset who would counter or discuss this thing about organ harvest in China and the persecution of Falun Gong. And all the MKs were very wary of this. And they would rather not be affiliated with this in any way because it was known to them that whoever will not be able to access China, will never be able to go to China. And Uri Orbach was one of the only ones in the mainstream political circles of the Knesset that says, yes, it's interesting for me. I think it's important. I want to hear more. I want to be affiliated with this kind of challenging and seeing what's going on in China in terms of, is this, Holocaust material? Is this genocide? Is this religious persecution of one of the highest degrees? So he was asked, what about the threat that you won't go to China? So he said, so I won't go to China. So I'm saying, Al achat kama v'chama. Okay, I'm saying if I spend so much time learning about China and understanding China, to keep quiet about things, no, I don't think so.
Do you feel sorry for the Chinese people? They're trapped in this.
To be honest, the good answer would be no for most sinologists, and I would say yes. Yes, when I recently more than ever, because when I see what's happening now with the last phase of COVID, this Omicron, well, the whole world is already, I hope, mefukachim,
smartened up
about COVID and the exaggeration of this curfew lockdown thing. And China is at its most cuckoo phase of COVID, much worse than what it was in the beginning in my eyes, and for much less, for something that's much clearly less of a threat to public health and public safety. Unexcusable, exaggeration. In my eyes, total madness. But that's my opinion. I wrote something on Facebook recently that I showed that when COVID started, and the first lockdown, which was more than a lockdown, it's a curfew, complete curfew in Wuhan in the beginning. And you had all these pro-Chinese elements connected with the Confucius Institute and the East Asian Studies departments making these videos of supporting China and saying, Wuhan jiayo, Zhongguo jiayo, meaning go ahead, China, full force, kadima. Continue with the lockdown. Continue with the struggle against COVID. In my eyes, this support in the earliest stage, instead of saying what in the beginning analysts were saying in Western countries in the newsrooms, were saying, wow, China is doing things that democracies cannot do. Democracies cannot consider locking down entire populations because of some threat of a virus, which is not much more than than influenza. This is only relevant to China and North Korea. It's not relevant to us in the West. And then people in Israel and other parts of the world said, Zhongguo jiayo, supported. China became normalized in recent years. The communist government became normalized and legitimized in the way that when they were doing these crazy measures of the lockdown, the first lockdown in Wuhan, people were showing support all over the world. The result was that northern Italy was the first to adopt the lockdown, and then UK went down. And in my view, the rest of the world, except for Sweden, adopted Chinese measures, which I see them as a kind of political
adoption of,
I call it Chinese atheism. It's political atheism. It's saying God does not have a right to kill people with viruses like he's been doing since beginning of nature. There's no God that decides.
The state is
the state is a complete God, and the state has to have this mission. And China, because they were singled out as hiding information at the beginning of the outbreak, and this famous doctor Li Wenliang, who died after being the first to talk about it, and he was taken to the police and then was shut up. So the government made an excessive response, and they did these lockdowns, and we adopted that.
I never thought about the God argument, like that, the sort of Tower of Babel parallel, right? That we're trying to build this tower to reach the Almighty, and we think that it's in our hands to fight this force of nature, this divine force.
I see this as a Chinese political worldview.
Yeah. If it's a force of nature,
used to be different to us,
unless
maybe it's a force of Chinese.
That's complicated. So that's
maybe but it is a force of nature. It might have been a consequence of action, of human action, but
like Jurassic Park was
but still, that's interesting. That's really fascinating. Unfortunately, we have to wrap things up, but we're really glad we had you on. That was really interesting.
Fun.
Kind of like a crazy, unexpected journey through China, from religion to COVID to Confucius centers. Super interesting.
You have a gallery in Zichron Yaakov,
that
right?
too,
So let's plug the gallery.
It's called Shoket Gallery.
Okay.
And just Google Shoket Gallery. It's actually connected. It has a connection with my choice to speak out, to not be wary of how I speak.
You have IYY pieces there?
Actually, I met him recently, and I don't like his art.
What?
I can tell you. I call it classical. My take on art is more classical. So
Rewind. You met him?
Yeah, that was really funny in Cambridge a few weeks ago.
Wow.
I went to his
That's
exhibit.
the most intellectual, like pompous thing I've ever heard. I just met Ai Weiwei.
Yeah, it was by chance,
at
actually.
Cambridge.
I was actually it was a Shabbat afternoon. I walked around Cambridge with my wife, and I knew that there was this Ai Weiwei exhibit in a gallery. So I walked in the exhibit, and then I walk around, and my wife tells me, "Isn't that Ai Weiwei over there?" And I see it, and it is. So I came up and I started talking to him, in Chinese, and he flattered my Chinese, and we talked a bit. It was really nice, and I was wearing my Shabbat shirt with stains from the gefilte, from the.
That's funny. Wow, that's crazy.
So
Shoket is
gallery.
Shoket?
Yes.
Okay, so
Shoket.art. You can find the website.
And it's in Zichron Yaakov.
It's in Zichron Yaakov, and I opened it a year ago, and I admit that in the back of my mind was this idea that the way that my choice regarding China is such that I do not want to have my income, my prospective income, dependent on China anymore, or on access to China.
Super.
You're on social media.
That too, yeah.
Noam
Urbach, yeah.
CH at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for coming, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. If you like what we do, go to tunjb.com/donate and send some money our way. And that is it. See you on the next one.
Yep. See you next episode, guys.
Bye.
Thank you so much, guys.